Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. Missouri State Senator Joe Keavney represents the people of the 4th Senatorial District. He is also Senate Minority Floor Leader. Mr. Keavney was first elected to the Missouri State Senate in a 2009 special election and was reelected in 2010 and again in 2014. Mr. Keavney grew up in the St. Louis Skinker-DeBaliviere neighborhood and is a graduate of Christian Brothers College High School. He earned an undergraduate degree in accounting from the University of Missouri St. Louis and holds a master's degree in finance and law degree both from St. Louis University. For the past 20 years, Mr. Keavney managed portfolios for high-income individuals and later managed compliance issues with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission for U.S. Bank. Senator Keavney's legislative agenda includes expanding early childhood education, evaluating the death penalty, improving procedures for child support, and issues related to trusts and probate, banking, retirement, transportation safety, and reducing wrongful convictions. State Senator Joe Keavney, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here.
I'm glad to be here.
I heard a very interesting discussion that you were part of with your colleague Senator Onder, and thought that was really cool, and sort of wanted to bring you here so we could talk about similar issues.
Senator Onder and I frequently get in debates over various issues. So
I was going to say you two are. Well, he's a Republican. You're a Democrat. He's a conservative Republican. What would you describe yourself as?
More liberal leaning. Fiscally, I'm extremely conservative, but on most of the social issues, I tend to lean to the left.
Isn't that what Democrats used to be like back in the 60s and 70s, say like a John Kennedy or a Johnson?
Well, quite frankly, yes, the Democrats were like that, and quite frankly, the Republicans were like that too. Only they generally lean to the right. We've just gotten so polarized. Some of my colleagues can't get far enough to the right, and on the other side of the aisle, they can't get far enough to the left. And I think that's one of the issues that we have to deal with.
And okay, so you've just said something important, that's going on in the legislature, which I think most people know. But now here's the real question. What is it that all of you believe need to be accomplished?
Improve the economy, jobs. I think everybody in that chamber is focused on helping Missouri grow economically. But where we get into discussions is how we're going to get there.
Okay. What do you think would improve Missouri's economy? And is there a way to improve Missouri's economy sort of outside the structure of the rest of the United States? Or is Missouri sort of stuck in this milieu of whatever's going on in the United States, that's where Missouri's stuck?
Well, I don't think Missouri's stuck. I think we have our challenges. We're going to attract different industries than some of the coastal areas or some of the areas that are rich in natural resources. We just don't have that, so we can't hope for that. But I think we can attract manufacturing jobs. Currently, of all the states, our automobile jobs are actually growing. The Ford plant in Kansas City is expanding. Wentzville is expanding. So the GM plant in Wentzville is expanding. So we have the ability to attract those jobs.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're familiar with this idea that people have about shipping cargo from the Gulf of Mexico up the Mississippi River and then distributing it out from the St. Louis port areas? Making
St. Louis a freight hub, yes. And quite frankly, it even goes further than that. It's the air freight too. We're trying to put a freight terminal out at Lambert St. Louis Airport to better utilize that to get access throughout the country by rail and by barge.
Well, you got this already designed freight or any kind of airport over at Scott Air Force Base that's just sort of sitting there.
It is just sort of sitting there.
Now, what you just said there, putting it at Lambert, are a lot of people who are elected officials really focused on Missouri, or is this regionalism something that people really want to work on? In other words, St. Louis region includes this Mid-America airport. Is this something that ought to be included in the thinking, or politically, do we need to just stay focused on what we can do to help Lambert?
Well, there's no doubt that we have extra capacity at Lambert. So I think the focus for Missouri legislators is to utilize that capacity. Could we operate regionally in a better manner? I would be the first one to say yes, I think we could. Are we focused on that? Not at the state level, I don't believe. Maybe in the local level we are, at the mayor's office and at
Mayor of St. Louis.
Mayor of St. Louis, but not at the state level.
Now, let's see, on that very topic, you had a bill that you guys were looking at, HB 514, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency.
Right.
That was an attempt, tell people what that was supposed to be. No, I won't do it.
Well, it's a TIF bill. It's a tax increment financing bill that provides for the state withholding should they decide to relocate to the site in North St. Louis. Half the withholding of the state withholding taxes would go to building out the infrastructure of the site, up to a maximum of $12 million a year.
Now, this would be the gentleman McKee, Paul McKee's land, or?
Part of it is.
Part of it is?
Yes. I think there's about 200 parcels of his. He owns about, I think, 1,700 parcels up there. Most of it is the old Pruitt-Igoe area, which Paul McKee has an option on, but he doesn't own.
And have you heard anything from the federal government or from the senators, the states, the national senators, about whether or not this is going to stay in St. Louis or whether it's going to move someplace else?
Well, I think they're still negotiating this. I believe decision comes out in March, so we've got quite some time to maneuver here. Senator Durbin from Southern Illinois was just in the news this past week or the week before. He's very aggressively wanting the site over at Scott Air Force Base.
And he's number 3 in the Senate in Washington on the Democrat side.
I believe that's correct.
And of course, then there's a fellow by the name of Barack Obama who I guess he votes out of Illinois as well.
I believe he does, yes.
Yes. So does that worry you?
Well, you know, again, is it a worry? We would love to retain the jobs and the site. You know, the federal government, quite frankly, made a mess of the Pruitt-Igoe site, and no one's been able to redevelop that area. So there is a ongoing federal program that if they abandon a site, that site would get preference. So, you know, does the Southern Illinois site worry me? I can't say it does. We would love to have it in Missouri. The worst thing if the worst thing that could happen is that it goes to Southern Illinois, I think we'll be able to recover from it. But you know, the site, the current site, is in the city of St. Louis, and the city of St. Louis has would miss the revenue if it were to move to Southern Illinois.
And that's a lot of what this is about, isn't it? It's about revenue.
Well, and most things are. You know, it's the government's function to provide services to the residents of the city, or the residents of whatever city, the government that we're talking about. And when revenue starts to fall off, the government has a hard time can't afford to provide the services that the residents are accustomed to.
Now, changing the subject, one other issue or one other function of government, which I think is primary, is roads and transportation. You and I have actually talked about this before. So from your perspective, what is going on in the state of Missouri with transportation and especially with funding MoDOT?
Well, the underlying issue with funding and transportation is tax increase, and how we're going.
What sort of tax increase?
Well, and that's part of the discussion.
Because the voters of Missouri just turned down a tax increase in August of 14, as I recall.
Of 3/4 of 1 cent sales tax.
Right.
So now, and the discussion has been more some kind of user tax, or so to increase the gas tax. What people don't realize is right now the funding at MoDOT is at such a critical stage that we will, if we don't do something this coming session in 16, we will not have enough money to get the federal matching
funds,
which is
about
That's $4 for every one that we have.
Yes.
From the federal gas tax. And
Say that again so people understand what you're saying here.
If we don't figure out some way to properly fund MoDOT, at least in the short term, we will lose the ability to draw down the full federal match that we're entitled to, which generates about $4 for every $1 that we raise.
Right.
Now,
so you put up $1 million, the federal government puts up $4 million.
$4 million, and that comes from the federal gas tax, which is money we're paying to the federal government. Mm-hmm. So if we're not drawing it down, it's going to some other state. So it's, in my opinion, it's paramount that we come to some kind of at least short-term solution so we don't start losing that match.
Right. So, in your opinion, what might a solution look like, since the voters decided they weren't going to pay a sales tax?
In my opinion, well, the answer is really 4 different answers. So 4 different options that we can do. We can increase the gas tax. We can float bonds to cover the reconstruction of Highway 70. We can institute toll roads, or we can do what we call a public-private partnership. Basically, sell the highways to a private individual, they'll redo them, and then they'll get their money through rents or some other way.
Tolls.
Could be.
And so then the government actually loses control over those roads as well.
Well, that depends on how the agreement is structured. The popular failure that people talk about are the parking meters up in Chicago. That's a public-private partnership, and as soon as the private individuals kicked in, they tripled the parking rates, which irritated everybody in Chicago. So that one wasn't properly done. There are ways, and there are experts in this field that can draft the agreement so that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now I'm told that, well, no, let me just back up and say this. Every so often, and I mean by that, not every blue moon. I mean, this is like once a quarter, maybe a little bit more than that, sometimes twice a quarter. I see gasoline prices in the pump near my house jump 22, 25, maybe 30 cents in one day from a Monday to a Tuesday, okay? I don't see any screaming headlines on the front page of the Post-Dispatch. I don't see reporters from Channel 2, 4, or 5 out there on a regular basis. Oh, what do you think of this? Maybe on occasion they'll do that, but that's about it. It takes them about 30 seconds. If we were to raise the gas tax 25 cents, I'm told by MoDOT, that would solve all their problems for years to come. And yet, people are so afraid in the legislature of raising, an extra 17 cents, 20 cents, 25 cents. They think they're going to lose their job over it. And yet, it seems to be a non-issue when the economy raises the price of gasoline.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, it's even more sensitive to that. We had a bill to increase the gas tax 2 cents a gallon last session that was filibustered by the conservative Republican senators.
Who are they?
Who are those
names, please?
Senator Rob Schaaf, Senator Ed Emery, I believe Senator Dan Hageman got involved in it.
And their explanations?
They weren't going to allow a tax increase to go through.
The reason, I mean, it's one thing to put your foot down, it's something else to explain why. Is it just petulance, or do they have reasons?
Well, if they had reasons, they didn't verbalize them very effectively, because I don't know what their reason was. My own feeling, I don't think people care if they spend $2.76 or $2.78 at the pump if they're not hitting potholes, if the street lights are working.
Right.
You know, again, we're getting back to the function of government.
But you and I both know 2 cents wasn't going to do it. That was just a patch. There was just a cold patch in the problem.
Exactly, because the matches are going away in 17.
Right.
We got enough funding for 16. 17, we're going to lose the matches. And that 2 cents would have kept the matches in place.
Just so people understand, not that long ago, just a couple years ago, MoDOT had about $1.3 billion a year to spend. And now, next year, I guess 2016, they'll be down to somewhere in the $350 million.
$350 million, and I think in 17 it goes to 320.
Right. And so Ed Hassinger, who's now the head of MoDOT, he was the head of St. Louis MoDOT, told me right here in that chair you're sitting in years ago that he needed at least $600 million, or MoDOT needed $600 million just to keep roads the way they were. And at 350, that means that roads will not stay as they are. They might be able to keep some of the roads good, but not all the roads for which they're responsible.
Right. People, and not only the roads, the more important part and the more inconvenient part is they're going to start to close down bridges.
Yes.
And start to reduce the...
They already did that in the Kansas City area.
There was one bridge in North Kansas City, it's already been closed.
Right. Now, interestingly, I actually heard a Missouri state rep, Republican, say that, oh yeah, MoDOT did that in conjunction with the Democrats in order to embarrass this Republican rep out there in Kansas City. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing, because it diminishes the whole idea in the public's mind that this is serious. This is a safety issue we're talking about.
That's exactly right. And for someone to say that, I think MoDOT does a very good job, and they stay focused on what the job they're supposed to do. But they can only do what they have the money to do. And, you know, I guess politics is everywhere, but I thought that sounds like that was pretty much uncalled for.
Yeah, it was. I was shocked, and I'm not easily shocked anymore. But talking about money, and if we can get the cameraman to zoom in a little bit on this is something off of your website, and there we go, and zoom back just a little bit. There you go. People can see here that each dollar of tax that Missouri has to spend is broken into various categories. Now, we're done with that. Now I'm going to go back here and actually start reading off of these things. Now, the two biggest areas that I see, social services, you're spending $26 billion. That's
correct.
In 2016.
The total Missouri budget
Right.
is $26 billion.
So of that, 1/3, 33%, is going to social services, and another 11, almost 12% is going towards mental health. So in other words, we're somewhere around the neighborhood of about 44, 45% of this $26 billion, or around between 11 and $12 billion, is going into social services and mental health.
That's correct.
But yet, at the same time, I see down here that only 8.3% is going to highways, and yet more people use highways and are dependent upon highways than they are on social services and this mental health stuff. Why is so much money aimed, 46% aimed at these two areas here, and so little is being aimed at something that is of great importance to the economics of the state of Missouri?
Okay. And to answer that, we'll talk a little bit about the budget.
Okay.
Of the $26 billion, $8 billion of that total is what we can actually maneuver in the General Assembly. So the other $18 billion is pass-throughs from the federal government.
Ah, okay.
Money that our taxes have gone to fund.
So this is our income tax
Exactly.
that went to D.C. on April 15th that's returning to Missouri on April 16th.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So then, what you're seeing here in mental health and in social services, the brunt of that is Medicaid. And we administer the Medicaid program, but that's really federal money coming into the state.
Explain to people, they've heard that term, what is Medicaid?
Medicaid is health care, and I serve on the Mo Health Net oversight. In Missouri, we call Medicaid Mo Health Net, and it is health insurance for the impoverished. Actually, the people that are on it now are disabled, elderly, children, and pregnant women. And it's about a $5 billion program. And it provides health insurance for those individuals. So the brunt of mental health and social services is pass-throughs from the federal government. The highway transportation, some of it comes from the federal. Half of that 8 cents comes from the federal. The other half comes from the state. So we could put more into that, but we don't. We just use our gas tax there.
I see.
There are actually 2 gas taxes in Missouri, a federal gas tax and a state gas tax. And they're about, I want to say one's 17.5 cents and one's 18 cents. They're almost the same. And that's the money that's going into highways.
Well, I'm sure you know, and I'm just saying this for the benefit of the audience, Missouri has, I think, the second or third lowest gas tax in the United States at 17 cents per gallon. And and because we're using less gallons per trip, it's sort of on a downhill slope right now.
Well, that's correct, and that's why that's the argument against the gas tax, because fuel efficiency is going to continue to get better. So the gas tax, we could raise the gas tax now. It will still have a diminishing effect over time.
Illinois, they put a sales tax in addition to a gas tax. They have a sales tax on a per gallon basis, which means that even as prices continue to go up, they're garnering more money into their fund.
Yes, and that's a very good point, because people don't realize this, I don't think. In Missouri, we only charge the gas tax, both the federal and the state. There's no sales tax on the sale of gasoline. Illinois does have a sales tax on the sale of gasoline.
I don't think that that Illinois is closing any bridges either. Now, going back to Medicaid, I see that this is a very important issue to the Democrats, both in the House and in the Missouri Senate. Matter of fact, you guys wrote a minority report on Medicaid. And this was based, you wrote this December 3rd of 2013 based on some hearings that occurred in 2013. And the Democrats were very dissatisfied with the outcomes of those hearings and what was said of the hearings. Would you care to explain to people what it was why this report was written?
That report was written because there was a lot of time went into those hearings. There was a lot of public testimony went into those hearings. And in my opinion, the conclusion of the committee was reached before those hearings were ever held. The majority party's report didn't include all the public testimony that was given. So we thought it was important that that the public in general know exactly what occurred in those hearings.
And what would Democrats like to do, or would be inclined? And by the way, we're running out of time. We got like about 4 minutes left.
Okay.
What would Democrats like to do if you were in the majority instead of in the minority in both houses? What would you do about Medicaid?
Oh, there's no doubt. I would expand Medicaid in a moment. We talked about job growth.
Yes.
We expand Medicaid. $23 billion moves into the state of Missouri. Our tax dollars, our money that we sent to Washington, D.C., we get to get back. $23 billion. We've got hospitals closing. And the major hospitals. It's going to affect you and I, but we've got the major hospitals. We've got the PJCs, the SSMs. They're going to lay off people, but they're not going to close. Some of these rural hospitals are going to close. I think by the time we get to the point where these rural hospitals start closing, because of the Affordable Care Act, they're being subsidized for their uninsured patients. It's called dish payments. The ACA was supposed to increase the payments through Medicaid, and the dish payments are going to be phased out. Well, as they're phased out, if we don't expand Medicaid, those hospitals are going to run out of money. And unfortunately, I think that's what's going to take.
Yeah, I don't think that it's, I had, oh God, James Keavney. I don't know if you know who he is. He's in charge of the Missouri Foundation for Health. And he sat here years ago and talked about rural hospitals and rural doctors and how there just isn't enough of it. And his organization works hard to try and get doctors, specialists in particular, placed out in what we would describe as the boondocks of Missouri. And it's not happening.
Well,
and now you're saying that in addition to all that, now they're going to close hospitals.
Yeah, I mean, one of the frustrating things for me when I sit through these hearings is I hear about the lack of access in rural Missouri to quality medical care. And at the same time, those same representatives are saying we can't, so we try to address it, you know. Then those same representatives come back and say, we can't expand the Medicaid program. So
I've had some of them here, and just as if I were them, I would say, or they would say to you, we're afraid that if we accept that federal money, I'm sure you've heard this argument, that at some point the federal government will start to taper off the amounts of money that they are offering, which means that Missouri has to pick up that differential, and that is an unending hole that will occur, and it will tear into the budget in a way which will leave MoDOT in an even worse shape than it's in now. Respond to that.
I have not heard one instance of the federal government doing anything like that. We talked about highways and transportation. The federal government is giving us $4 for everyone. They've done that as far back as anybody can remember. They've never come off of that. So why are we picking on Medicaid? They've told us the first 3 years were going to be 100%, and they were going to taper it down to 90%. It was going to stay at 90%. I can't think of a single time where the federal government has said that they were going to fund your program and then withdrew that funding.
We're going to have to leave it there for now. I had tons of material that we didn't get to. You've got to come back and spend a little more time with us. Thank you very much for being with us today. It's been very interesting.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. To the audience, I've been speaking with State Senator Joe Keavney. He represents St. Louis City, North St. Louis City, North St. Louis County, no, I'm sorry, South City, South County. And we had a very interesting discussion here today. He's really open to actually saying some things that are really important, unlike some other politicians. We're going to put this on YouTube so you can see it again. Go to YouTube and see it. Thank you very much. See you next time.